to the prayer, we got there, but we spent an hour, I spent an hour with the taxi driver after I got to the meeting in the cab, and at the end of it he said, the difference between you and I is I have absolutely no mission in life, and you do. Well, I think he's right. I really feel a sense of mission to, in a sense, do what Nietzsche did, but bring them to a different conclusion, to confront them with the logical conclusions of their beliefs. And we mentioned before the program how important it is what we believe. I'm interested in knowing how society got to this place. I mean, 200 years ago, most people believed in absolute truth, even if they didn't believe Christianity was it. Now we're at the point where truth is relative. It doesn't, you know, what's right for you might not be right for me. Who are the philosophers are the philosophers the guys who brought us to this point? What influence do you think contributed the most to getting us here?
Well, there are several philosophers we could mention, and we could go back pretty far in history to some earlier thinkers in the modern period like Kant and Hume and others. But I think the one who really got things started down the road to the relativistic society that we have today would be Nietzsche. He'd be probably the first name we should mention, who pointed out the logical consequences of an agnostic and or atheistic worldview. In more contemporary terms, though, people like Richard Rorty and Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, Michael Foucault, another one, those who would be considered postmodernists, have brought us to this point.
And what surprises me is I've never heard of these guys. Now, and I'm sure 99.9% of the people watching the program have not heard of these guys. How is it then that they've had that much influence?
Well, philosophy, I like to put it this way, that philosophical ideas begin in the ivory tower, but they never stay there. They always trickle down to the man on the street. And they usually do it, I mean, this is maybe a topic for a whole other program, but they usually do it through art, through literature and other forms of art. That artists study philosophy for the most part. And then they communicate philosophical ideas through various artistic media like film and literature and so on. And then the man on the street picks up those ideas through art. And we see this in our own culture, especially in the film media today, which is extremely powerful and communicates philosophical ideas of all kinds. And people pick up these ideas and they believe them.
You know, it's really interesting. When you said that, well, I don't know why this popped in my head. My family makes fun of me because I say I like the arts, and they say, that means you like movies and rock and roll, Dad.
That's right.
But what popped in my head when you said that was, I was and still am, really, I have to admit, here's confession time, a big fan of The Who.
Okay.
Partly because their music was very philosophical in its wording.
Right.
You know, we'll get on our knees and pray we don't get fooled again. It was one of their big songs, Teenage Wasteland. They made a lot of comments about almost a Nietzschean philosophy of the absurdity of life. But in the line of one of their songs, it says, I don't need to be forgiven. Well, that had great influence on me as a young man before I came to Christ and came to the point where I realized I do need to be forgiven.
Right.
So let's take that as a transition and talk about responsibility.
Okay.
Can I talked to another person in Europe, and his comment to me was, here's what he said, quote, I see absolutely no reason to believe in the existence of God. Now, I have to believe that he's got to be rejecting some things that he inherently knows, because the bottom line is he doesn't want there to be an existence of God. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would have to know this man personally to know his own motivations, but in my experience, that's often the case, that people don't want there to be a God because they know that if there is, they have to be accountable to him. And that it brings up the issue of responsibility, as you said. Sure does.
So that's my big question here is, you know, if we number one, get people to consider, do you believe there's meaning or not? Do you believe there's absolute truth or not? And to get them to decide, yes, I do, or yes, I don't. If they come to the conclusion, I really don't think there's meaning to life, then help them to see the package they're buying. That there's no, love is not better than hate.
That's right.
Murder is not worse than peace. You know, what Hitler did is no different than me putting Amdro in my yard to kill fire ants. It's just because there's no distinctiveness, there's no meaning, there's no value. So, on the other hand, if they decide, and most people that I've talked to, I ask them if they say I don't believe in God, I say, do you believe in right and wrong? And then you enter, to me, in the area of responsibility. How can we help people that decide, okay, maybe there is such a thing as right and wrong, understand that if that's the case, there has to be an accountability towards right and wrong. How do you get them there, I guess, is from a logical standpoint?
Well, there could be more than one question embedded in what you just said there. I may have to distinguish those, but to me, one question is if they're able to acknowledge that there is right and wrong, then the next question in my mind that arises is, okay, where do these objective moral values come from? What grounds them? What makes something right and wrong?
And evolution, I don't see how it could produce that.
Evolution. Suppose evolution is true. If evolution were true, it may tell us where moral values come from, why we believe that there's right and wrong, but it wouldn't make those moral values objective. It wouldn't make them true.
Right.
So, but if we believe that there are true moral values that truly are binding on us, then we're going to have to go beyond evolution and ask why that's the case. Another question that comes up in conjunction with the same idea is, if there are true moral values, then how do we know them? How do we discover them?
Right.
How do we learn what they are? I personally believe there are two answers to that. One is the Bible. I believe the Bible teaches us right and wrong, and what at least some of the basic core moral principles are. But on the other hand, not everyone, of course, believes the Bible. I believe that we have an innate awareness of right and wrong, and that we're born with a conscience. Certainly this conscience needs to be trained, but nevertheless we have an innate awareness of right and wrong that we can just see. We can just see that torturing little children for the fun of it is wrong.
Right.
And I would argue that anyone who can't see that is defective in some way.
Right. Right. Or they've embraced they're willing to sacrifice what they know to be true in order to embrace the philosophy they want to live by.
Exactly. That's right.
Not that they would themselves torture children ever.
That's
you know,
right.
they might be repulsed at that, but they're willing to say it's okay in order for them to do what they want to do.
That's right. So to wrap that up, if I could, just to say that if a person is willing to acknowledge that there are absolute moral values, then I think that he owes it to himself and he owes it to other people, because your actions and your beliefs can affect other people. He owes it to himself and other people to find out what grounds moral values, find out how he can know what the moral values are, and to do his absolute best to learn what's right and what's wrong.
We got a minute and a half left here. This is a good way to wrap this up. To me, in our efforts to bring people to faith, or to encourage them to consider putting their faith, which it seems complicated sometimes when you're talking about reason leads us to the necessity of faith. In my opinion, if we're reasoning these things, we have to come to the point where we realize I've got to put my faith and trust in something, and realizing that we already are, either in ourselves and our own abilities. And then we come to the absolute need for revelation. It seems to me the two approaches the Bible takes to proving the existence of God and absolute truth are creation and conscience. Those are the two biblical arguments for these things that we're talking about. Am I on the right track there?
I think you're right. And it's interesting that philosophers who have talked about arguments for God's existence have focused on those two areas as well.
Well, we come back to the idea here that the Bible is so relevant to me. And in the next program, we're going to start talking about that. Like you said, how do we get to these truths? If they exist, how do we find them? So I want to encourage you to watch, this program and stay with us. When you see this aired exactly a week later, it'll air, and they both air twice. They repeat. They start on Saturday night and repeat on the next Friday night. So I really encourage you, if you're a seeker, to stay with this, because it's important. So thanks for watching Church for Skeptics. We'll see you next time.